All right, we're live. Welcome to Dive into World Building. You guys all know me. I'm Juliette Wade, and today we have a guest on the show. This is Marion Deeds. Say hi, Marion.
Hi.
So I met Marion because she is in the Strange California Anthology with me, which is super fun, which meant that I got to meet her in person at FogCon, which was that 2 weeks ago now?
It was 2 weeks ago. Time flies.
Yeah, man, when you're busy, right? But anyway, so I thought she was cool, and I thought she had some interesting ideas and worlds that she was working in. I thought it would be fun to have her on the show. So I'm glad to see you, and we're just gonna chit chat about world building here today.
Okay. Sounds cool.
So what is your favorite thing in world building? I guess that's a good place to start.
The things that interest me are all of the sort of cultural things. So I'm interested in languages. I'm interested in how status is communicated. I'm interested to some extent in clothing. And then out of nowhere, because I spent years considering myself not the least bit economically interested, and I was bored by the stock market, and I would roll my eyes whenever they would have an economist on, some news show. But in spite of myself, I've become really intrigued by currency systems and economic systems and how they work and how they don't work.
Mm.
I see Che wrote a whole book about clothes, so that looks interesting.
Yeah, she sure did. How's that? Are you there, Che?
Yes.
Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, it's Magical Fashion School.
Oh my gosh.
Uh-huh.
So that's kind of super fun.
I'm sorry, I just had this completely random flash. One of the guys on Say Yes to the Dress as a wizard. Sorry.
Hey, I mean,
pull back.
There are a lot of reality shows that you could do adding magic that would be like super amazing. Yep. Okay, so this is cool. You and I happen to share an interest in cultural and language things. So
yes,
that's super fun. Now, when I'm not recalling when exactly it was that I became aware that you had just written something that was set during Prohibition.
Yeah, I've written a couple of stories. I actually had one appear in Podcastle. The Prohibition part of that story is very much in the background, but Prohibition in America was an interesting time with, and there's a lot that you can do with it. And when you add magic, it gets even more fun. And I'm clearly not the only person doing that. I've run across several books that are either kind of conventional magic, but in the Prohibition era, or magic is what is prohibited, or there have been all kinds of permutations. I just finished a general fiction short story. I have no idea what I'm going to do with it, about two sisters, based loosely on some family members of mine who lived in Massachusetts during Prohibition, and the husband of one of them ran a hotel and made regular, probably 3 times a year, I'm going to do air quotes, vacation trips to Canada. And would come back, and then suddenly the little private room at the back of the hotel would be open for business again, and his friends would get bottles of whiskey. And the family story was they had separate bedrooms, which is interesting in itself. But then he would come home from his trip to Canada, and he would always come into her room and kiss her goodnight and leave her gift bottle of Canadian whiskey on the bedstand. And that was just so cool. I had to experiment, look at that a little bit and explore it. Especially, I had not realized this. I found out purely by accident about 3 months ago that there are 2 islands off the east coast of Canada that are French territories. Is a French territory. And Canada had some prohibition laws, but theirs were really patchworked, and they were province to province. But France was having none of this prohibition stuff. And so it was really pretty easy to go from the United States to Canada and then just get on a boat and pop over to France, where you could buy pretty much anything you wanted. And I just thought that was fascinating.
Yeah. That is fascinating, actually.
Yeah, the whole history of Canada and how they sort of helped us work around our prohibition issues is actually, all of that is pretty fascinating. And
yes.
I'm sort of doing that now because I have a bottle of Saskatchewan dwarf cherry whiskey in my house right now.
Yeah.
Well, there you go.
Neat.
Dwarf cherry
yeah,
whiskey.
I think Canada was quite helpful in helping us find ways to work around that pesky prohibition law.
Yeah, that was interesting. I'm over here taking notes. So can you tell us a little bit about how you chose to introduce magic into a prohibition context?
Okay, this becomes sort of a long circuitous thing, but I like it.
Long and circuitous.
I for no apparent reason at all, I had a desire to do a pastiche, a comic pastiche of the Maltese Falcon. And it was inspired by this really terrible book that was written by a guy named, I think, I.J. Rondale in the 30s. Now I'm just going to, so Juliet, this is what I do. It's all going to weave back in, but I'm going to go way off down the scenic route here.
I'm listening.
The scenic route is, to those of us who are as old as I am, or probably in their 50s or older, they might actually know who he is, because he wrote another book about health food, and he was on a show called The Dick Cavett Show. And he told Dick Cavett that he was going to live to be 100. And 10 minutes later, he died on the show. He had a fatal heart attack and died in the chair. So that's pretty interesting. Before he discovered health food, he wrote a couple of style books that were supposed to help young writers. And one of them was called The Said Book, S-A-I-D.
Okay.
He was of the opinion that the word said was terribly boring, and you should never use it. You should use a punchier, flashier verb for speech tags.
Yeah.
And furthermore, if that weren't enough, in case your reader missed that you used a flashy verb, you should attach a even flashier modifier to it.
Oh, okay.
Oh, God, yes!
So and it was like a menu, you know, at the back of the book, it had these tables where he broke out punchy verbs by type of speech and then suggested adverbs. It's hilarious.
Oh,
and it's terrible.
Oh my God, this is the greatest thing I've ever heard.
And you can find the said book used, and you can get one for like $5, because I actually have one somewhere. So I was talking to some writer friends, and we were just falling out of our chairs laughing. And then we started thinking about writers that we wanted to inflict the said book on, or apply the said book to. And I decided the Maltese Falcon could really benefit from being written by just horrifically full bore, pull out all the stops, purple prose. So, and then I decided that, well, no, actually, that isn't the story. The story is, that's the magical curse that is the MacGuffin that is equivalent to the Maltese Falcon. That there's this grimoire that if you have it in your hand, you begin experiencing the world in purple prose.
Oh, nice.
That's great.
So that was fun. And in it, because it was the Maltese Falcon, I had to have a Sam Spade-ish character whose name is Rick Rake. I had to have his partner. I had to have his secretary. And then I had to have the assortment of the adversarial characters. And that book was written and set in 1929. So it's in during Prohibition, although from reading the book, you would never know it from the amount of drinking they do, which is sort of, I think, part of Emmett's point.
Yeah.
So then I just started thinking about, well, this is a world, I want this to be a world in which magic is known and magic is somewhat codified, and there probably are some laws about it, and certain areas are more open about it than others. I figured San Francisco being basically somewhat lawless wouldn't have a whole lot on the books about magic. And that's what got me into it. So that's chapter 1. In that, I had a woman character who was basically the Bridget O'Shaughnessy character, and she was fun to write. But then when I was done with the story, I thought, well, she's just the Bridget O'Shaughnessy stand-in. I want her to be a real character. I wonder what she's like.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to do her origin story, and that's the story that ended up at Podcastle.
Oh, okay. Isn't it funny how stories develop out of each other?
Yeah.
So is anybody else hearing an echo?
Yes.
I'm hearing a buzz.
Okay, I had a little bit of an echo issue earlier, and I apologize for it. It should go away, hopefully.
Yeah, it did last time.
It did
That
last time.
sounds better.
Yeah, I think it's gone away again. I think it's about something between the connection between me and Marion, so I'm afraid that there's not a lot we can do about it. But anyway, hopefully it will continue to go away a lot.
Let's hope it goes away. I don't know what it would be on my end, but it does seem like it started when we got.
Yeah, don't worry about it because it's already gone away. So hopefully we'll just be able to get through without it completely. That would be nice.
That would be nice.
Cool. So if I'm understanding this correctly, a lot of what you've done here in this story that you've been describing is a very realistic rendition of Prohibition US, with magic sort of slid in as one of the sort of basic culture items, maybe? Is that
I like that description. I think all three, like the Dashiell Hammett story, the Maltese Falcon has very little about Prohibition. It was merely that it was set in that time period.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, the name of that story, which isn't out anywhere right now, it's still sitting on my hard drive, is called The Book of Purple Prose. The magic is the MacGuffin. The book itself, people want to have it. They think they can control it. They're wrong. You know, the usual sort of issues you have with magic. The one that was at Podcastle, Never Truly Yours, she is writing a Dear John letter to a Mark, basically. And I got two men's names in that sentence, and I wasn't even trying to do that. And it goes, and she's telling him about her childhood, which is actually earlier than Prohibition, in a world in which, magic is, the world is a pretty realistic world, pretty similar to our world, and the magic has been accepted and brought in to varying degrees. So some people are against it and don't like it. Some people are superstitious about it. Some people want to exploit it. Some people want to control, all of that. So there are laws about it. There's a taxonomy for it. Probably there's a tax system for it, just because if there's something out there, someone's going to find a way to tax it, and so on.
Yeah.
Yep.
We agree. Well done. Well done for thinking of the tax angle. No. Yeah. So this is fun. This is fun. So, when do you have a sense of when the magic was accepted? Was it like accepted shortly before, or was it accepted long before?
I think it's been accepted long before. And when I think back, I mean, I want to be very cautious because it's not really a terribly alternate history.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that I struggled with all of these stories is if I were really going to look at this for real, I can't imagine that if somewhere in probably Europe, magic got accepted, I can't imagine that there wouldn't have been other historic changes along the way. But I didn't really want a lot of those. So I'm guessing probably somewhere around the same time as the spiritualist movement in the United States.
Oh,
is
yeah.
when it would have been somewhat, coming out of, coming out into the light and people acknowledging that that's really what it is. And then, of course, there would always be those people who said, oh, I always knew it was real, and claim to have generations of convention and tradition back to support it.
Mm-hmm.
It was a little bit of a struggle because I had a reference in the Dashiell Hammett story to Rick, the detective, having done something very heroic in World War I that involved magic and not getting any recognition for it because he's a werewolf and werewolves are discriminated against. And so it was kind of like being a Jewish soldier or being an African-American soldier in World War II. You may have done something very heroic and they tolerated you because you actually had a skill they wanted. But even though let's say a mundane who did what he did would have probably had, the Silver Star or something, that was never offered to him because he's a second-class person. But I don't lean too heavily on that. He doesn't ever turn into a wolf in the story. It's just an idea of this might be one of the ways it would go if there were people who had these abilities.
Okay. Cool. Interesting things. Okay, so I know you have another thing going on that involves a portal.
I have a work in progress. I have a novel that I'm currently in this iteration calling a portal fantasy, except that we're the strange exotic world that the visitors have come through a portal to. And it is set in, as I like to say, the exotic city of Vallejo, California, and Mare Island. Vallejo is really interesting, and Vallejo is not one of those destination cities in the Bay Area or the East Bay. It isn't considered as cool as San Francisco or Berkeley or even Alameda. And it has its issues, don't get me wrong, but it's got an interesting history. The military history of it is interesting. Some of us sort of feel that the whole base closure thing was actually an act of realpolitik. You can kind of look at how certain political things play out and the gloves come off when you have, for example, a representative who's too liberal and too fearless and kind of thing. And certainly some racial issues. A lot of stuff that is really interesting to writers and a lot of stuff that I am fascinated by. And then right across the strait, you have Mare Island, and Mare Island is also fascinating in different ways. So the novel is a group of people who have come from a different dimension. They are non-human. They are magic users. They might be somewhat analogous to fairies, although they don't function like the Fae in any tradition of the Fae. They wear disguises so they can pass for human about 99% of the time. And there is a young human woman who encounters them. She is struggling with PTSD because 2 years before the book starts, she was in a shopping mall that was bombed by an act of domestic terrorism. And she got out, and she actually helped some other people get out, but she's wounded by that. But then something that and part of the reason she's still wounded 2 years later and not doing the things she might need to be doing to work through the PTSD is something else happened to her in the shopping mall that she's never told anyone about that makes her believe she's delusional. So what she finds out pretty early in the book is she's actually not delusional. She's one of the 1% who can actually see the visitors in their regular form through their glamour. And they find that both disturbing and interesting, and they think they can use it because they've been gone now from their world for quite a long time. The magical technology in their world, they have every reason to believe, has improved. And so the people who are coming after them, and there are people coming after them, may have even stronger glamours or veils that they can't even see through, but a human with this odd quirk in their brain can. So this is the thing about sort of language and culture, and I loved that you had done on your blog a thing about posture, because that was one of the things I really struggled with the visitors, is having Miranda, who's the human woman, watch them interact. And one thing that happens is certain of the visitors will lower their head, they'll look down, they'll do this, which for us is usually a gesture that you're humble, or that you're obsequious, that you're acquiescing to someone.
Mm-hmm.
But the visitors have horns. And what they're doing when you lower your head to someone, that's a challenge. And when you are showing that you're acquiescing to them, you raise your head so that you're exposing your throat.
Mm-hmm.
And and it's sort of like, so that one I was really proud of. And then working through it, I was like, and now there must be another 50 things every day in the way they move that's different, and I don't really know what all those are. And do I just work in one or two to kind of remind people, the reader, that they're not human. They may look human, but they don't move in a way that's human. So that's been interesting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And as far as that question goes, I mean, I think you only need to have a few differences that are visible and emblematic of a more general sort of aura that's different. Right.
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to weigh things down with a lot of descriptions of how they move.
Exactly.
But I think having a couple of key differences is helpful. And then if there's something specific that comes up, obviously mention it. But it seems like, that sounds like fun. Do you have their points of view in there?
I only have their points of view in two places. I have the woman visitor character does a break in the story where she's actually telling Miranda's story, and I shift into first person. She is the hereditary ruler of one of the countries in the other dimension, and she's had to flee because her uncle, who was the regent, tried to have her assassinated when she was a child, and that's why she's here, and sort of her government in exile is here. She's an interesting character. She's got a definite attitude. And one other section, we go into one of the other visitors' points of view in a flashback, where I'm showing the reader how he managed to bring this basically princess, they don't use that term, child ruler who has been traumatized by the death of her parents and abused by her uncle, and is now in a completely strange environment where nobody looks like her, nobody talks like her, and everybody is afraid of her, and how he's tried to raise her. But the rest of the time, we're solidly in Miranda's point of view.
To raise a child.
I did even better than that. The scene is the period of time, the passage is when she's a teenager. So you know how you're supposed to torture your characters? I have tortured him.
Awesome.
He has his hands full.
I was curious about doing their point of view, because if our area is it's sort of like a Portal fantasy, but / alien invasion / I mean, it's got a lot of different kind of elements.
A little bit of First Contact in there.
Yeah.
I'm just imagining the like possibly one of the first things that they're noticing is watching Americans eat. And the thing where you're cutting your meat with your hands, with the knife in one hand, and you switch in order to bring it to your mouth because we're weirdly handed, and just having them just be sort of like, I don't even understand what's happening here.
Why would you change hands? I don't get it.
And if they ever go to Europe, they'll go, oh, I get, okay.
Oh, I get
These people I get.
Oh, I get it. That's what they're doing. Yeah. They are certainly perfectly willing to point out our foibles and quirks to us in the book. So
excellent.
Tell me. So can you give some examples?
Yeah.
Well, so there's a big discussion back and forth about, well, just about politics, because there's a faction of her group who wants to go back and put her back into power. And Miranda says, well, you know, that's really old fashioned. Why don't you have a democratic system like we do? And the aliens basically just burst out laughing, and they're like, oh yeah, we've seen how well your system, you know, works. The fact that we have no magic and we use electricity differently than they do is a source of great interest to them. Their magic is basically manipulating electricity physically. And so they are amazed and a little freaked out by things like smartphones. They are apprehensive about the increase in the technology because they believe, because of what they understand of electricity, that pretty soon our technology is going to reach a point where it penetrates their glamour, their veil. They are a little bit afraid of us because basically almost all of them are smaller than us as a race. And so trying to think what else. There was a lot of stuff about food because it was really a struggle for them to find food they could digest.
Interesting.
And trying to remember what else. Those were the main things, except that the woman who is the ruler at one point just really goes into, this is not particularly funny or even cultural, it's more poignant, I guess, I hope, that she's stuck in a place where nobody really knows what she looks like. Nobody gets up and sings the morning prayers the way her mother and father always did with her. Nobody eats what she eats. Nobody dresses the way she does. And yet she doesn't believe she can go home because she believes she doesn't believe she'll ever really take back the throne. And that idea of being adrift was I was kind of going for that with her a little bit.
You could spin this off into a YA novel. I mean, seriously, if it was entirely from her point of view, you would have like a YA novel.
And
that would be interesting. Yeah, I could. And
I love the idea of, because I used to live in the Bay Area too, of living in the Bay Area and not having anything that you can find to eat is just sort of
right.
Yeah.
Sort of counterintuitive.
It really is, but I love that because it is that way. I mean, imagine if they had ended up in Kansas.
Yeah. You're in the foodie capital of the world. I'm biased. The foodie capital of the U.S. and what you can eat is really limited. So
and you know, everybody thinks that you either have a ton of allergies or that you're like super picky.
Yeah. Or both.
Oh, we're not going to dinner with her again, are we? There won't be anything on the menu she'll eat.
Right? Like, but this
is like going to dinner with me, though. So
yeah, I love that.
So yeah. Anyway, it's fun. However, I did want to talk to you, Juliet, about language because the language is really a struggle for me.
Oh.
I wanted the grammatical structure of their language to be different. Miranda, they do a magical procedure on Miranda, which means she can understand their language, but it hits her brain differently because they do syntax and grammar differently. And man, they either sound like Yoda or I get the structure that I want right. And then when I'm trying to write a scene that has to have a lot of drama and there has to be a lot of interrupting each other.
Yep.
It's almost not comprehensible. And I don't know if I have the chops to actually do it.
Well, yeah, I'm sure you can find a way. It is very tricky. But doable.
When you said hit the brain differently, I immediately thought of like synesthesia.
Oh, that would be interesting. If she, yeah. Their language is tonal and it's affected, and it actually if you haven't had this magical procedure done, it actually hits the human ear more like bird song or bird calls.
Mm.
I just saw synesthesia. And basically the sentences are somewhat inverted. And in some cases they leave out the verb because the verb is implied.
Mm-hmm.
Those sentences actually kind of work because there actually are English speakers who do that. So that one wasn't as weird. But other places where I'm trying to get a sense that they have shifted from English into their language and she is catching up with them, it's tough.
Yeah, it's going to be tough. My immediate thoughts are, so you're trying to reverse syntax. Okay, so there are a couple things you can do. You can change how you want the grammar to work, or you can try to emulate some form of our language where syntax gets inverted a little bit. So, for example, you could have their language sound super poetic, for example.
Right. Right now, that's what I'm closest to.
Well, I mean, I think poetic is great. If you can go for poetic, then you're not going to lose the emotional component. I mean, because anytime that you're using a foreign language or reasonable equivalent thereof, that is the danger, that you'll lose the sort of connotational and emotional connection that an English speaking reader will have. Yeah, I mean, so you can do more indirect speech. You can do different kinds of stuff. But if you're actually having to report direct quotation, I think your options are being poetic. One can be poetic and reverse syntax without sounding like Yoda, but it does take a bit of work.
Yeah, I'm gonna have to pull out those particular sentences and really take a look at them.
That's definitely a multi-step process. Would be a good way to do it. Get the idea down in Yoda, and then work it backwards.
Yeah. Did you say in Yoda?
I did. Down in Yoda. That's what it is. No, like, don't worry about taking steps to get there.
Right.
For sure. No, I think.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you all.
I'm always like very frustrated because there was this one blog or just some article I read, and it was a year or two ago, and it had a children's book that was written in, I'm not sure if it's grammar or syntax, but it's written in the way that American Sign Language is, like, and it's a different word order.
Mm-hmm.
And I just thought, oh, that's really interesting. I didn't know the grammar, like the word order was so different. And then I just, left the article. And ever since, I have been searching for that article and for that book, and I can't find it. It's like gone into the ethers.
That would be really interesting.
Yeah.
American Sign Language is really interesting because not only is the syntax and grammar slightly different, the culture is different.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
They're far more direct. In the language. It's something that appeals to me because I'm horrible at not being direct. And it does not serve me well in the Midwest.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, there's that. And then, I deal with international students almost all of the time. And so I hear a lot of not just inversion, but also substitution in error.
Yes.
Yeah. And, just getting people to try and figure out, what these things are and realizing that we have this ridiculously massive vocabulary.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And it comes from so many different places that it's really, really hard for people learning English, to figure out why the plural of sheep is sheep and the plural of moose is not meese.
Yes.
And things
Exactly.
like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, so
Interesting.
here's one of the things that I do when I'm designing prose styles for an alien. Okay. I don't actually like to mess with syntax a whole lot because of the Yoda factor. So what I will often do is I will try to work on the semantic level. Try to create cultural concepts, and I will try to create metaphors that reflect the way that an alien species lives their life and conceptualizes their world.
Mm-hmm.
And those are actually extremely useful and do not cause a lot of static for, English in translation kinds of things.
That's helpful. I did spend some serious time with their metaphors and their figures of speech because their culture is different. Even to not using, and struggling with words like, I knew I wasn't using king and queen, and then that meant I wasn't using the word kingdom, which I didn't even think about. I actually had typed kingdom on the screen, and then I thought, no, they don't have kingdoms, that sort of thing. The idea that they are a coastal people and they're a seafaring people, and a lot of their metaphors are about water, a lot of metaphors about ocean. Yeah, I could lean a little heavier on that, and I could keep a tiny bit of inversion that sounded cool and sprinkle it in there sparingly.
Yeah.
That could work.
Or you can, so for example, you can use adverbs in atypical spots. Systematic. Like, for example, in French, you put adverbs before the object instead of after it. So, so there are small things that you can do that you do not have to mess with subject, verb, object as much. Yeah.
That would not be as jarring.
An example of me going all out on this is the story called Sunwake in the Lands of Teeth, which came out in Clark's World last year.
Okay.
That's 100% alien point of view from one end of it to the other.
Oh, interesting. Okay.
A lot of people bounce off of it. But people who manage to get into it get really into it.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Well, and also at last WisCon, I went to a panel. There were 4 people, and I can only remember 2 of them. It was Monica Valentinelli and Ben Rosenbaum, and they were talking about when they create a world, how you create profanity.
Yeah.
And so in one of them, his world was very liquid. People swam around. It was a huge part of the city, and so sewers were a big, huge part of it. And so one of the worst things you could possibly call someone was, for example, one who litters into water. And then he created an alien word for that, but that was the definition. That's what that meant. And so you get the idea that throughout the culture, water is not only what we live in, but it's also part of our sacred space. And so the people who are bad in our culture are those who defile that space.
Interesting.
It was a fascinating discussion. I can't wait for this year.
Yeah. The character that I'm referring to from the Clarksville story last year is actually a very wolf-like alien. And so his entire metaphor of life, it's an expanded metaphor. And basically, life is not a journey, it's a hunt.
It's a hunt. Yeah.
But I do it in lots of ways. So like goals or quarry, and any colleague of yours is a hunt mate. Right. And so, these are little things that you can do.
Well, it's interesting because a quarry could be the next Starbucks.
Right.
Right.
Yeah. Right.
The object of whatever you're looking for, if life is a hunt. That's interesting. I like that.
Yeah. So we have a lot of metaphors for life. Right. But picking one particular one to organize everything else around is very helpful.
Yes.
And really creates very little static, right?
Well, we actually have constructions like that. It's not so much American English, but British English of, you know, I'm really hungry as I could murder that right now.
Yes.
So,
yeah,
you know, there you go.
Even people who say I'm on the hunt for, you know, I'm on the hunt for the perfect urban fantasy book or something. Yeah.
Sure.
That does exist.
We have a huge proliferation of metaphors.
Yes.
And you can find them in all kinds of weird places. But what they do is they influence how we think. So, for example, somebody who thinks argument is uses the metaphor argument is war is going to have a much tougher time working out a win-win situation.
Yeah.
Somebody who is using a different metaphor for argument,
like dance.
Like dance.
I'm reading George Lakoff's book right now, the reprint of Metaphors We Live By.
Yeah. Lakoff he's awesome.
I had a thought that I have not written about, but it's in there somewhere of that in the evolution of primates, we didn't learn to speak until after we learned to dance. Because we didn't have the idea of we are both going to cooperate for this common end until we figured out how to move together.
Huh. Interesting.
So feel free to take that and run with it.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I know that you had said that you had some questions that you wanted to talk about with me, Marion. I mean, we only have about 7 minutes left. So,
well, one of the things that my other than reading a couple of your stories, my first introduction to you as a writer actually weirdly was taking your linguistics online course that Kat is offered at the Kat Rambo Academy for Wayward Writers, which was great, by the way. I recommend it to anybody. And I wondered, since we're already kind of talking about it, are there books out right now that are out where you see the particularly language, but maybe other things, the cultural aspects of the world building being done very well that you would recommend, and why you would recommend them?
Well, I have all kinds of opinions about the world building and the language use in every single book that I read. But A Stranger in a Laundrette is amazing linguistically and culturally, and the language that it's written in is so gorgeous. It's by Sofia Samatar. She was on the show.
Yes. Yeah.
So that one is just linguistically amazing in all ways.
Both of those for me are sort of at the top of the pile.
Yeah, so those are pretty amazing. I mean, I don't think I'm actually going to go very far afield from what you might have heard about recently. I'm an enormous fan of Anne Leckie. And I think that her Samatar's prose is just lush.
Yeah.
Anne Leckie's prose is much more spare, but she gets the job done, and she does these really cool things. Like her pronoun work is fantastic.
Yes.
I was actually going back because I get to actually teach ancillary justice to a couple of my students.
Neat.
For their English lit novel, and so we're gonna have some fun. But one of the things that I was doing is I was going back and I was looking at how she sets up the premise of the pronoun usage. And it's actually very deftly done. It's not heavily explained, but it is explained, and it is explained briefly and effectively in a context in which it's very relevant, which is super helpful.
Yes. Yeah.
And so, so like when you're doing that, when you have something like that, a big language artifact that you're going to have your reader accept, being able to explain it briefly, and not only that, but to choose a context to place it very carefully so that it's near the start of the book and also in a spot where it's highly relevant, like necessary for you to understand conflicts in between two people, for example. That's super, super helpful.
So you're talking mostly now about obviously the ancillary series. Mm-hmm. I thought a couple other places she did a really good job of just dropping in a detail from the point of view of Breck that reminded us, in case we'd forgotten, how the pronouns worked.
Yeah.
And just enough to kind of refresh us, because what I've heard from people, the first couple of chapters, the first 2 paragraphs, I was like, oh, I see what she's doing. This is cool. And then a couple chapters in, I started to struggle with it, which is an odd time to. And then it's like then it clicked and I got it and I didn't have trouble after that. I've talked to other people who said, yeah, the struggle went on a little longer and they really appreciated those moments where there'd be some reference and they'd go, oh yeah, that's right. Well, it's a single gendered language. So
the idea that she speaks the language that has this feature, but the people around her don't. That is what I mean by creating conflict context.
Yeah.
To support something without having to explain it a lot of times. Yeah, so that's really cool. Everything by Ursula Le Guin ever.
Yeah.
N.K. Jemisin does some amazing cultural work. Just like everything she's ever written, basically. I have a particular fondness in my heart for 100,000 Kingdoms and that series.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of it though now. I think more and more we're seeing people who've, taken the writing the other class or done a lot of really deep thinking and boy, it shows, It really shows. I mean, there's a lot of neat work going on out there. It was interesting. So for example, I had Nnedi Okorafor correspond with me about something. I believe it was that I had done a ridiculously close look at something that she had written. And that's what, when I do that, it's kind of like a textual analysis. And I asked her to sort of comment about it. And she commented about it. And she was like, whoa, was that what I was doing? Right. So she does a lot of amazing language and world work. She wasn't in that case aware of every last bit of what she was actually doing, which is, I think, important to point out because there are a lot of people out there who will not attempt to do something hard because they think they can't control all the variables, right? You don't have to control all the variables. You have something called a brain, and the human language brain does a lot of really neat stuff all by itself under the radar while you're not even particularly aware of it. And so my sense is give it a shot, and if you can then look at it later and get some outside perspectives and see if it's working and maybe make it better, great, right? But not everything that you do linguistically on a page has to be planned too. So, because it can be awesome, even if it's not planned.
Yeah.
And, you might find your subconscious has a little magic wand back there is doing some cool stuff. And there we are.
One of the reasons I come to this podcast. I get permission and I don't have to ask for forgiveness.
Yeah, that's right. Well, I mean, we talk about a lot of funky stuff, but I always figure we gotta try to get people's brains going in a direction. That's the main goal with the topic.
There you go.
And who knows what happens after that?
That's true.
So anyway. All right. Well, it's just hit 5 o'clock.
Wow.
So I'm going to thank you for coming. We see you had a lot more to talk about than you thought.
I did. I was worried, but that flew by. That was great.
Anyway, this has been a lovely discussion. I have lots of notes, and I will try to get to putting this down on the blog before too long.
So before we leave, Che has 2 recommendations.
Yes, let's do it.
I just want to make sure I get them. Aria of the Sea.
Yes.
Uh-huh.
And the Monster Blood Tattoo. I was doing this thing. I was sitting here going, you know, oh, I'll remember. And then I thought, no, you won't. So
it's the Monster Blood Tattoo is a series. The first book is called Foundling.
That's okay. That sounds familiar. I'll have to look those up. Okay. So anyway, those look really fun. So thanks for the recs. Appreciate it.
Sure.
Julia, thank you. The time flew by.
Yeah, thank you. Well, great. You know, this stuff is just super fun and cool. So
and feel free to come back.
You're welcome to come back anytime that you have free time and want to pop in.
Thank you.
Before we go, I have managed to get in connection with Khalida Muhammad Ali, and she's going to come on the show. And I think it might be next week that she'll be on the show.
Wow.
I will confirm that with everybody by the usual means, which are Twitter and Facebook at the moment. So I will keep you updated on that. And I believe that I can stop the broadcast.
Have a great day.
All right. Now, if you'd like to stay on and chit-chat, you don't have to do anything, Marion. I'm just going to hit a button here.
Okay. Have a good one.